My name is Lisa. I'm 35 years old and work part-time. I live with my husband, Mark, and our daughter, Emma. Mark works in an office and Emma is in first grade. We bought an old house and still owe money on the mortgage. When Emma started school, I began working part-time to help pay off our mortgage. Mark is the older child in his family, but his younger sister, Nancy, got married before us and moved into their parents' house to take care of their father. Initially, it seemed like Mark's father was open to anyone inheriting the house, but Nancy, who married first, pushed Mark out, saying, "I'm looking after Dad, so the house should be mine." When Nancy moved into her parents' house after her mother passed away, her father was still healthy and didn't need her care. The house was impressively large with a beautiful gate and spacious land, which amazed me when I visited it before marrying Mark. I couldn't help but wonder if Mark's parents were wealthy. During our dating days, Mark didn't seem to come from a wealthy background, so seeing his parents' grand house was a surprise. Mark explained that his grandfather had been wealthy, but financial difficulties arose during his father's time. Despite its size and prime location in a residential area, Mark described his parents' house, inherited from his grandfather, as old-fashioned and not very comfortable to live in. He joked that even if they sold it, its value due to the large plot of land was remarkable. I understand somewhat why Nancy kicked Mark out and made him live in her parents' house. She wants to feel happy owning this land and house. But I'm not sure if Nancy actually owns the property and house now. When Mark and I got married, he promised me that since Nancy would take care of his father, I wouldn't have to worry about taking care of my father-in-law in the future. Because of this, we decided to buy our current house. It seemed right that Nancy, who would care for her father, would inherit the house. Even from my father-in-law's perspective, he would probably feel more comfortable being cared for by his daughter if he became bedridden and needed care in the future, rather than by me, his daughter-in-law. However, when we visit my in-law's house for Christmas or summer holidays, Nancy seems to treat her father poorly. Even during meals, my father-in-law is treated like he doesn't belong. When Mark or I try to sit with him, Nancy gets angry and says, "Dad prefers to eat alone, so leave him be, don't interfere." After meals, when I visit my father-in-law's room to chat, he expresses his unhappiness with Nancy. "I don't want to stay in this house because Nancy makes things difficult." According to my father-in-law, he always eats separately from Nancy's family and gets fewer side dishes. Despite this, Nancy still takes a significant amount of money from her father for living expenses, even though he lives on a pension. Despite saying she would take care of him, Nancy doesn't do his laundry or much housework. My father-in-law does most of the cleaning inside and takes care of the gardening. Because Nancy ignores her father, even her husband and children who live with them don't treat my father-in-law with respect. When my father-in-law, who doesn't drive, asked Nancy's husband if he could drive him to the horse race track on his day off, he was treated as if his request was absurd. "I'm not your driver. If you want to go to the races, take a taxi. If you have money to spend on horse racing, use it for our living expenses." My father-in-law said this jokingly because he was bored, but he was strongly scolded. Nancy's 10-year-old son is cheeky and seems to tease my father-in-law. "Grandpa, stay away. You smell. Don't come out of your room." Even though they've lived together since he was born, my father-in-law seems to have no memory of ever holding him. When my daughter visits, he dotes on her and talks with a hint of loneliness. "You're my only grandchild." When I heard those sad words, I started feeling sorry for my father-in-law. Every time we visit his house, my husband gets upset and tells Nancy to treat their father better. In response, my sister-in-law angrily argues back at my husband. "I am treating Dad just fine. Are you trying to take this house away from me? I won't let anyone have this house." My husband finds it troubling how fixated my sister-in-law is on the house. Then my father-in-law had a fall at home. The house isn't set up for elderly people, and he tripped over a small step, fracturing his right hand. Thankfully, he didn't suffer any other injuries and didn't need to go to the hospital, but it's difficult for him to do anything without the use of his dominant hand. We visited him and were shocked to see how weak he'd become. Not only can he not use his right hand, but he can barely move and clearly needs help. Despite this, my sister-in-law's family completely ignores him and doesn't take care of him. He can still manage to get to the bathroom on his own, but eating is quite challenging for him. My husband immediately confronted my sister-in-law, asking, "Why aren't you looking after Dad?" My sister-in-law seemed not to understand why my husband was upset and laughed it off. "A broken hand is no big deal. Stop overreacting. He can walk by himself and he's not complaining." It seems my father-in-law, used to being neglected, finds it hard to stand up to my sister-in-law, and she probably knows it. My husband was even more furious. "Isn't it obvious that we should take care of our parents?" he exclaimed. Hearing this, my sister-in-law smirked and replied, "Same goes for you, Mark. You take care of Dad. I don't want an old man with hardly any money." I was enraged at how my sister-in-law could talk about her own father that way, but she continued, Taking care of a father who only has a small pension isn't worth it. Her words were so cruel that I couldn't hold back and spoke up. Fine, we'll take care of him. He won't heal properly if he stays here. My husband agreed, and we decided to move my father-in-law out of his house right away. While we packed his belongings, my sister-in-law started making demands. Just because you're taking care of Dad doesn't mean you get the house, she insisted. It was clear my sister-in-law cared more about the house than her father. My husband brushed off her remark. Don't worry about it. I already bought a house. I don't need this one. Do whatever you want with it, my sister-in-law said, seeming relieved. While we prepared for my father-in-law's move, neither she nor her husband helped. Instead, they seemed focused on checking his belongings for anything valuable. It appeared they were benefiting from his pension, which would end once he left. They hoped to find something valuable to sell, but there were no treasures to be found. When my father-in-law left his old house, my sister-in-law and her family didn't even say goodbye. They were so cold. But when he arrived at our house, he seemed to brighten up as he happily played with my daughter. It was like he was a different person compared to when he was living with them. We gave him a room that wasn't being used, but because the move was sudden, we hadn't made any preparations. I'm sorry we didn't know earlier. We could have renovated, added handrails, and removed any steps. I apologized to him. I wasn't fully prepared. I'll install the handrails and take care of it soon. To my surprise, my father-in-law also apologized. I'm sorry for causing you worry too. I wonder if $200 million will be enough to cover caring for me and to look after my horses, he joked. I couldn't help but laugh. Horses, you say? I chuckled, knowing there was no way I could take something as fanciful as horses and $200 million seriously. Deciding to play along with his joke, I replied, I'm not sure how much it costs to take care of horses, but taking care of you will definitely cost more. I didn't understand why he brought up horses, but I thought his joke was just something wealthy people might say. However, when I saw my father-in-law's worried expression after my reply, I began to wonder if he found my joke funny. Then he started speaking seriously. Does it really cost that much to take care of someone? All I have left is $200 million. Looking at his serious face, I realized his earlier joke wasn't really a joke at all. Panicking, I tried to explain, I was just joking. $200 million is more than enough. In fact, it's too much. I immediately went to my husband to ask about the horse business and the $200 million. My husband seemed just as puzzled, but then he remembered something about his grandfather being a landowner. Remember how I told you my granddad was quite wealthy? Maybe Dad owned horses, my husband speculated. Together we approached my father-in-law to hear the full story. It turned out that he had owned horses for many years, and his frequent visits to the racetrack weren't for betting but to check on his own horses. He had never shared this with his family, so my husband and his sister had no clue. Now, with his broken hand, he was starting to seriously think about his future. He worried that mentioning his ownership of horses and having assets worth $200 million to his daughter and son-in-law might lead them to demand it from him, especially after my comment about home modifications. Feeling concerned, he decided to confide in me about his horses and financial situation. Understanding his apprehension, my husband reassuringly said, I'm not sure how much it costs to care for horses, but with $200 million, you should be fine. We'll handle your care expenses, so don't worry about it. My husband's confident assurance put me at ease. After confirming with the person who had always looked after his horses that everything was in order, we settled the issue about the horses. Knowing now that my father-in-law was quite wealthy, I started to see him in a new light. I thought that once his daughter realized he had significant assets, she would regret kicking him out. Imagining her regret brought me some satisfaction. Since my father-in-law moved in with us, our lives had changed. Balancing my part-time job with caring for him was challenging, but my husband and I managed together. Having my father-in-law at home brought new joy to my daughter, who found a new conversation partner in him. He seemed happier too. His walking had improved since moving in, and even before we finished the home modifications, he could walk slowly with a cane. Though his broken hand was still healing, he was practicing eating with his left hand. Back at his old home, his nephew would complain whenever he left his room, so he didn't move around much. When he tried to go to the racetrack, his son-in-law seemed annoyed. This lack of activity might have contributed to his muscle weakness and fall. On sunny days, he could now take walks with my daughter's help. I had been so focused on his recovery that I hadn't thought much about my sister-in-law. However, 3 months after my father-in-law moved in with us, she called in a panic. Is Dad there? Get him on the phone right away. At that moment, my father-in-law was out for a walk with my husband and daughter. When I told my sister-in-law this, she became even angrier. You knew, didn't you? You knew that house was rented. That's why you took Dad to cause problems for us. I was confused by her accusation. She seemed to be implying that their house was rented, but she had always claimed it was theirs. Even if it was still in my father-in-law's name, calling it a rented house didn't make sense to me. As I struggled to respond, my sister-in-law became more agitated. Some guy claiming to be the landlord of our family home showed up, saying I'm behind on rent and that I need to either pay up or leave. My confusion deepened. When she mentioned the landlord of their home, I wondered if he had come to collect rent from my sister-in-law. Right then, my father-in-law returned home, so I quickly explained the situation and handed him the phone to speak with my sister-in-law. With a hint of anger, he addressed the daughter who had driven him out of his own home, saying, "Didn't you know the house was rented? It belongs to the company where my father was the CEO. I've been paying the rent until you kicked me out." My father-in-law sounded distant and angered, and my sister-in-law, sensing his frustration, shouted back over the phone, "I never heard about this. I'm coming over right now, so wait for me." About 30 minutes later, my sister-in-law and her husband arrived, their faces flushed with anger. They seemed surprised to see my father-in-law walking independently, but the focus quickly turned to the pressing issue. As my sister-in-law erupted again, she accused, "You said the family land belonged to us, Dad. Did you deceive me?" Smirking slightly, my father-in-law responded, "I didn't deceive you. I just didn't tell you because of how you've been treating me." My sister-in-law was left speechless by his comment, and her husband intervened, saying, "Setting that aside, can you please pay the rent? If not, we'll be evicted from the house." My father-in-law chuckled dismissively. "Why would I pay rent for a house where I no longer live? After you kicked me out, isn't that a bit unreasonable to ask?" Unable to counter his logical response, my brother-in-law fell silent. Then my sister-in-law spoke up. "Dad, were you planning to make life difficult for us all along? You seem more energetic now than when you were living with us, even with your injury." Stepping in to clarify, I said that's because he's been doing daily rehab exercises, practicing walking, and working on using his injured hand. My father-in-law nodded in agreement. "Being kicked out by you was actually a blessing. Since moving in with Mark, we eat together as a family, and I feel valued." My sister-in-law and her husband were left speechless. Just then, my daughter innocently revealed my father-in-law's true situation. "Grandpa, your horse is racing in the next horse race, right?" My father-in-law grinned and replied to my daughter, "It's racing this Sunday. How about we go watch it together?" Excited, my daughter ran off, but my sister-in-law and her husband quickly caught on and asked him, "Dad, do you really own a horse? Are you a horse owner?" With a self-satisfied look, my father-in-law answered, "I didn't say anything because I knew if I mentioned money, you'd try to take it. And talking about horse racing always annoyed your husband." Suddenly, my father-in-law's demeanor turned serious. His stern expression sent a chill through me. As he spoke slowly, the tension in the room grew even thicker. "I no longer consider someone like you, who disrespects your own father, as my daughter. I knew you moved in with me hoping for inheritance." Caught off guard by my father-in-law's stern tone, my sister-in-law looked visibly stunned. His final words, "You won't get a single cent of my inheritance," seemed to deliver the final blow. Hearing this, my sister-in-law appeared shocked and staggered. Her husband, who had been supporting her, also seemed defeated. They both slumped their shoulders and quietly left. The rent for my father-in-law's house turned out to be a substantial amount, far beyond what my sister-in-law and her husband could afford. They had no choice but to move out. Neither my husband nor I knew that the house was rented until this incident, and my husband later confirmed it with his father. After leaving, my sister-in-law, who had been careless with money when rent wasn't a concern, suddenly faced financial hardship. Their spending habits proved hard to change, and they relied heavily on credit cards, leading to mounting debt. I heard they moved to her husband's parents' house since they could no longer rely on my father-in-law, but I'm unsure what happened next. Since we started living with my father-in-law, things have been incredibly smooth. Despite his initial injury, his hand healed well, and he regained strength in his legs and hips to the point where he can now manage everything independently. He's become so energetic that he even goes jogging with my daughter. He's truly transformed since we first moved in. Following that incident, my father-in-law has been having serious discussions with my husband about various matters, including planning for the future and even drafting a will. I'm not sure what's in the will, but I suspect he's made arrangements so that his daughter won't inherit anything. What made me especially happy was when my father-in-law paid off the remaining balance of our home loan. We had almost 20 years left on the payments, so I'm incredibly grateful he took care of it ahead of schedule. With the loan cleared, my father-in-law is now considering renovations to make our home more accessible. He talks about his plans with a smile, but when he jokes about being able to stay in bed anytime, I gently remind him that I want him to stay healthy and active for as long as possible.